Where I go to the freezer and I take out the leftovers from the month, like if you had leftover bolognese, leftover stew, and I'd actually add all the bits together and we'd have dinners. And like it works grand and the kids don't mind, like, but if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do to, you know, to keep going.
I walked into the house today and I mean it's cold outside but it's cold inside, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, well, we haven't filled the oil tank in over 2 years, but we're very lucky because we do have a great stove down there with a back boiler on it that heats the radiators at night. So I light a fire around 4 and we get the house nice and warmed up, and we put on an extra bit of coal when we're going to bed. But I'm very lucky to have that option because it's very hard to find €800 or €900 to fill your oil tank.
Today is the 31st of January, it's the last day of the month. How much is in your wallet, if you don't mind me asking?
In my wallet, there is €10 and odd change.
Okay, so you have
today,
a bit.
We're getting paid today.
What other changes have you made around the house in the last couple of years to save money?
Well, I haven't used the electric dryer in over 2 years because I know that it costs a lot of electricity to run, so I have clothes, hearse things upstairs, and we just fill them and they dry. And I use the fire sometimes if I'm, you know, under pressure to get something dry, like uniforms or stuff.
You would say that your husband has a relatively good job.
Yeah, he's a good job, and that's why one of the reasons why I sat down to write the letter, because I didn't understand how people who are on the industrial wage, who are on a 3-day week or had lost their jobs, can get by. I just didn't understand it, and the response to the article has opened my eyes big time, and I feel embarrassed that I put down on paper what I was struggling with. When I see their responses, it's heartbreaking because they can't put on the heating. I can light a fire at 4 o'clock and kids will be nice and warm. They can't. I can tell my children, no, you can't have that funny hat with a face on it if we can't afford to buy it. They have to explain to their children why the light switch won't work or why they can't put on the telly because they've no electricity. I mean, the cases out there are terrible.
At the moment, Linda is paying her mortgage but is afraid what will happen this year. So this Saturday she's dropping a letter into her bank asking for help.
We're saying, wouldn't it be interesting if anybody who is in the situation we're in or worse would join us, and we all put the letters in the same day. Wouldn't it say something to the banks that if you think the mortgage crisis is bad now, look what's ahead of you. And you're only asking for a mortgage holiday or whatever, interest-only payments, whatever option you choose. But even a holiday, wouldn't that give, if probably 100 people got that, wouldn't that give them a break for a few months? Maybe to a bit of a chance, a bit of a breather to catch up on maybe other bills or whatever, put money by for back to school, whatever. Give them a bit of a break because we need a break. The banks were bailed out and now we need a bit of a bailout here. We need a bit of a break.
And how do you feel about stepping forward now and being the voice for...
I do not want to be on camera. I don't want to be on the front page of my local paper. But I feel that somebody has to make a start, and that's all this is just a start. By me talking to you, this is huge because I'm on telly and I'm saying the things that they want to say. So I'm telling the government and telling the banks that I'm struggling, but by God, you should see the emails I've gotten and they're heartbreaking. People are really, really suffering out there and something needs to be done.
And we're joined now by personal finance expert Carl Dieter from advisors.ie. Good morning to you, Carl.
Good morning.
What do you think of that? It's sad, isn't it, to see that? And
yeah, I find it tough to watch. Any time I hear that people are struggling financially, it always upsets me, and that's whether it's the third world or in Ireland. In terms of, in Linda's example, I think there probably are lots of people just like her, you know, who have children where only one of the people in the family is working, or where one could have lost a job or had their hours cut. But what I would say is that typically when we're helping people with big problems, it tends to be one of two things. It's either debt or an absence of work is something that gets the better of them. Now, if you lose your job, that's an obvious one, and we've got, you know, nearly 500,000 people who are, if you add up underemployment, unemployment, and those who are in transitory work, are in that situation. The other group, though, is interesting because I would call the working poor, which is where someone is working, and they still can't make ends meet.
Well, that's Linda's case. Linda's
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Well,
I mean,
they are paying the bills. They're not in mortgage arrears. They're able to pay every bill except at the end of the month. She said that they don't service their cars because they can't, they can't afford that. They just don't have that end of month money.
Yeah.
But they're not in arrears.
But even things like not being able to afford central heating. I mean, these are things that you would see as kind of fairly basic levels or standards of living. You know, you're not living large by heating your house. But in that example, for instance, she said her husband has a good job. Well, they also have 6 children. And that's a huge expense or a draw on any household, irrespective of how successful you are. But that's not something where you can turn around and say, oh, let's give 2 of them back. You know, once that happens, then you've got them until, well, depending on how old, maybe 30 or 40 in Ireland. but this is the thing. You then have all of these concerns, and your debts and your bills don't go away. And we're also at a time where interest rates are at historic lows. What happens when rates start to go up? A lot of what has been keeping tens of thousands of families in Ireland above water is actually the ECB. And if that starts to change, then we are going to have a much bigger problem than we already have. So her idea of writing to the bank, I think, is a good one. It's well-founded. But what I would say is that you don't have to wait until you're at a point where you're that concerned, where you're saying to yourself, I'm not going to service my car, we're not going to eat for a day. Because under the legislation, and people obviously don't know this, you're protected under the Code of Conduct on Mortgage Arrears if you think you're about to go under. It's called pre-arrears. And you're given the same protection and rights and benefits as someone who is in arrears and is engaging with the bank. And what they will do is they will try to find some structure that will make your life more affordable rather than watching you go over the edge for no reason. And as far as from what I can see on the clip, I mean, she's right on a knife edge. Every month is just, there's just nothing left. That's a textbook case for saying, talk to your bank.
Okay. She's, as you said, you know, if you're putting on your central heating system, you're not living at large. You're talking about pre-metering for people like Linda.
Oh, yeah, well, that's a good choice. I suppose if you're on an oil tank, you don't have the choice of a prepaid meter because that's something that exists certainly more in rural areas. But certainly in cities and even for electricity in any area, you can get prepaid meters on natural gas in cities and on electricity across the nation. There's a company actually called Prepaid Energy, I think, and they'll install it for you. And what happens is you basically top up. It's like topping up a phone. You turn on your electricity. When you have only a €5 credit left, an alarm goes off. It won't cut you off at night, won't cut you off on the weekend. But it's a good way of dealing with things because if you make a budget and you say, I'm going to try and spend about €3 a day on natural gas or electricity, I mean, how do you gauge that? But when you have the meter, you can actually tell, and you could just say, listen, when it's gone, it's gone, and that's it.
Well, we wanted to know how many other people were also really struggling at the end of each month, so I went out on the streets to find out.
Well, I'm self-employed, so we don't have monthly outgoings, but there hasn't been anything in the pot for quite a while. We were always a poor country. We've come back to being poor again now.
Not a lot, not a lot. Basically nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Okay. Are you struggling to just to make those payments?
I'm just looking for some extra work at the moment because there's nothing at the end of the month. Like some of the bill cannot be paid, so it's a nightmare.
No, not at all.
Nothing left?
No. You just get by day.
Really?
That's it.
Very little. I retired. I was a teacher. I retired. I went out early. I went out on just before the Croke Park Agreement, and there's so much been added in since we left, like water charges coming, household charges. Everything is extra. There's very, very little.
Very little. Very, very little. You just struggle each side to get by.
Really?
Struggle, yeah.
Property tax that they're bringing in as well, that's just, you know, they'll have to bring in some sort of a system that if people are going to pay it, that they can pay it a weekly way.
Okay.
Not expect people to hand out, say, €300, because if you have to pay a gas bill.
The property tax thing, that's a whole other thing. You're not a big fan of property tax. You think it should be land value.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, what we did is miss a big opportunity because now all the land bankers, developers, people with big, huge portions of land that don't have houses on it, and it is one of the biggest forms of wealth in this country, get a pass over, and that just puts more taxation onto the people who are in homes with kids trying to make ends meet.
And they're the people that the economy is depending on.
Well,
the middle-income families.
Yeah, the engine of an economy typically tends to be people between the age of 24 and about 50. Now, it's not to say there aren't others out there who are highly productive, but that's kind of your key group, and that's the same key group who's getting crushed all the time. So
what advice would you have for people like Linda, or for people we just saw on tape there?
The biggest thing I'd say, and it's kind of a no-brainer, is to do a budget. And everyone says, oh yeah, he probably would say that. But I'll tell you this, every time I see people with financial problems, I can't think of one who came to me with a strict budget that they stick to. And you really wouldn't believe the power of breaking down what you have after tax, saying, you know, what are we going to spend our money on, and then trying to stick to that, and just writing down as you're spending the money to get a really good handle on it. If you do that, you will improve your situation without question, even if you've got next to nothing, because it is the one way of really focusing your attention and knowing what you're spending money on. Now, it won't put extra money in your pocket, but it will show you perhaps areas that you can save, and certainly if you end up going to the likes of the Money Advice Budgeting Service, or talking to your bank saying, I'm a pre-arrears case, that you can say, listen, here's all of our expenditure. It's all laid out there precisely right down to the last penny. I need help because we've only got a tenner left, as you can see. They're going to look at that and say, well, that's an easy decision for us. It's all done out there. We're not trying to extract information from you. Make the job easy for the people that you need help from, and you'll find that help comes far quicker, and that would be the best way to do it.
Linda is asking for everyone who's struggling with their mortgages to send this letter on Saturday into their banks asking for a mortgage holiday. How do you think that's going to go down with the lenders?
The truth is they probably will just send out a lot of computerized responses saying, if you feel you have a problem, you're protected under the legislation, here's the code, here's a form called a standard financial statement. I think it's great that people are starting to mobilize and have a voice. I wouldn't say, though, that that of itself is going to be any seismic shift in terms of how banks deal with people, although I would welcome anything where people start to get a bit more organised in terms of trying to deal with the banks, because there is a lot of frustration out there with the delays that the banks have had in terms of dealing with people with financial problems, and this is obviously one of the positive ways to make a change on that. So I wish her good luck, and everyone else who writes in.
Okay, Carl, thanks so much. And remember, if you have a finance question for Carl, here's how you can get in touch.
If you've got a story you'd like to share, or if you'd like to get in touch with the show, we want to hear from you. You can email us at themorningshow@tv3.ie. Find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/TV3 Morning Show. You can talk to us on Twitter using the hashtag TV3MS in your message, and you can follow our Twitter stream at TV3 Morning Show for updates on features and competitions. However you get in touch, we'd love to hear from you.
After the break, pregnant, but she never knew. New mum Joanne Harding will be telling us about giving birth to a surprise baby next.
Oh, thank you for doing that.